The next time you hear the Gardaí say that they can't afford to recruit extra Gardaí because they're being badly paid, or nurses are being badly paid, or teachers are being badly paid, or there isn't money to fill in potholes, well, you might keep this next piece of audio in mind. This is Peadar Tóibín speaking in the Dáil yesterday.
Count Corlia, a national hospital 6 years late and €1.4 billion over budget. An opaque HSE coming down with management that can swallow up billions of euros but can't make a decision. €300 million spent on the Dublin Metro projects without any construction. Dozens of flood defences stuck in a banjaxed planning and court system. Not one approval for a wind farm in 12 months, just 7 offshore wind turbines built in 20 years. Over 100 electric buses sitting for 18 months for the lack of charging points. 500 modular homes that were meant to be built in October 2022, yet to be delivered. €22 million of dodgy ventilators bought by the HSE being stored at a cost of €75 million. Spending €18 million fighting €14 billion of Apple tax due to Ireland. €10 million of HSE rent overpayments because someone mismeasured the rooms. No one ever held responsible. No one held to account. When it comes to administration, is this government not one of the most wasteful governments in the history of this state?
This is an opportunity to raise one question on one matter, not a litany. Not a litany.
Wastefulness is the question.
Minister, very briefly, please.
Thank you. Well, you must be in your element, Deputy Tóibín, because nobody likes to talk and spend all day talking about challenges and problems in yourself, and you have even exceeded your own capacity to do that in that 1 minute contribution you have there. But this is a government that are trying to make progress every day in terms of infrastructure and in terms of public services. We acknowledge, by the way, that there's challenges in relation to planning and making things happen quickly. Because we are impatient as a government for progress. We're impatient to make sure, in terms of how we're managing the economy, that we can see that translate into good public services and improved public infrastructure. One of the challenges around that has been our planning system. And what this government has done, under great work from previous Attorney General who made this his signature act, Paul Gallagher, in relation to bringing forward the third largest bill ever in the history of this state, the Planning and Development Bill, which will go through the Oireachtas over the course of this winter to try and address some of those challenges. I look forward, but not with much optimism, to a positive contribution from yourself to make sure that goes forward, Deputy Tóibín, because we need to see cross-party support across the House to make sure that becomes law.
Thank you very much.
That's Agriculture Minister Charlie McConalogue there, responding to Aontú leader Peadar Tóibín and TD from Meath West, and he joins me on the line right now. Peadar, are there not checks and balances in various government departments to ensure that when budgets are allocated for various projects, that they're actually spent properly? Or am I wrong?
No. Well, there are checks and balances, but the real check is accountability, and nobody's taking responsibility for what's happening at the moment in the delivery of capital infrastructure in this country. So remember, Ireland really needs significant capital infrastructure. We had about 10 years during austerity where there was very little of anything built and very little upkeep in terms of our capital infrastructure. That may sound like a boring issue or a dusty issue, but it's not. It's issues like the Navan to Dublin rail line. It's issues like housing for people, like hospitals for people. It's issues such as transport. So the big issue that I have at the moment is we have a accountability, responsibility-free zone when it comes to delivering capital infrastructure. I'll give an example. The National Children's Hospital, obviously, €1.4 billion potentially over budget, 6 years delayed. Now, it was Leo Varadkar himself, as Minister for Health, who actually put forward the tender process in which there was a hazy, nebulous design for that project. And because the design wasn't right from the start, there had to be loads of redesigns. And I know one room in that building that has been redesigned 120 times at a massive cost to individuals. Now, in a normal society, if that was in the private sector, someone would lose their job in relation to that level of waste and overspend. So take another example, housing. There are 3,500 local authority houses now empty, and that's in the middle of a housing crisis. You could actually stick all of the homeless children in the country in those 3,500 empty homes. It takes 8 months to turn around a local authority home currently. It takes 3 weeks to turn around a private rental accommodation at the moment. Why is the state spending 8 months turning around a house when it can be done for 3 weeks at a time when there is a housing crisis and so many people are in emergency accommodation? But I think that the political class in this country have become so accustomed to this bureaucracy, so accustomed to this waste, that they're not even considering it. They're not even focusing on it.
Right,
and
but the question I have to ask you, though, are there not people within each government department whose job it is to keep an eye on expenditure and make sure that targets are met in terms of money allocations for various projects so that projects are delivered on time and on budget?
There are. But the problem is, if they're not delivered on time and on budget, there's no cost to anybody, there's no penalty to anybody, everything continues as it was.
So what's the solution?
The only way you can actually change the behaviour of senior people in the public service is that there's a cost, there's an accountability if major mistakes are made. And that means people must lose their jobs if they don't fulfil their contracts to the state properly. And if you don't have that level of accountability, everybody will touch people. It'll be in the news for 6 or 7 weeks. The country will be shaking their heads and going, what's going on in this country? But the political class will move on and nothing will ever change. So one of the major solutions is accountability. The second issue is we have a planning system at the moment that is glacial. If you want to get planning an application for a house or for a major infrastructural project, it can take years to do. So take Middleton just a couple of weeks ago. It got inundated with water.
Sure.
They have been working on developing a plan for a flood defence there since 2015. The planning application is not even submitted yet. So when it is submitted, it will take years to wind through that process because the court system is a mess. So in other countries, if a person commits a murder, they will be in jail within the year. So in other words, the whole criminal case will go through the courts within a year. In this year, it could take 2 or 3 years for cases to actually come up. And many of these planning cases actually take 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 years to come through. So what the government needs to do is make sure, first of all, that those systems are resourced and that they are efficient in delivering their projects. Like the whole idea about the 120 electric buses that are sitting up in Dublin, the government bought them 18 months ago. They're sitting doing nothing for 18 months except gathering dust. Why? Because the government and the state forgot to get planning permission for the chargers for those buses. Now, if that happened in a private company, in a shop down there, in any street in Ireland, the person who made a mistake in not making the application would have lost their job. But that person will never lose their job in senior public service situations.
Finally, Peadar, and very briefly, I mean, if you were in government, if you were a minister, what exactly would you do to ensure that when civil servants are asleep on the job and there's budget overruns and there's millions being paid out for this project and millions being paid out for that project, but there's not enough money to fix the local potholes, what would you do to sort this out?
We would introduce the same criteria that exists in any big company in this country, that a person has a contract of work, and if they do not fulfill that contract of work, there's a penalty for that. You do your best to help the person if they make a mistake, for sure. You put in supports if people make mistakes. But if a person continues to make mistakes that cost the state and the taxpayers money, well, that person has to lose their job. And you reform planning, and you reform the court system, and you bring about a culture in local authorities that there's a penalty if they don't turn around local authority houses faster.
Okay, I don't know, by the way, if the state is still paying big money for the storage of those infamous electronic voting machines, but something tells me it's something that some government ministers don't want to talk about. Anyway, we're going to leave it there. That's the leader of Aontú, Peadar Tóibín, and TD for Meath West.